Tennessee This Week from WATE's 6 on Your Side starts now.
Hello and welcome to Tennessee This Week, and thank you for watching. I'm Don Hudson. We begin far away from Tennessee, but really with a story and a situation that impacts hundreds of people here in our area. A diplomatic solution was in the works to try to end or at least pause the conflict in the Middle East between Hezbollah and Israel, but on Thursday it took a big hit when Israel rejected a peace deal backed by the United States. All eyes have been on the Middle East ever since the invasion last year, and then the mass murder of Israelis, and then nearly a year after that, we have these more recent fighting going on, Israel ratcheting it up, strikes on Hezbollah, targets in Lebanon, Israeli bombs killing hundreds just days after the pagers and other electronic devices blew up across Lebanon. Wednesday, the Israeli army chief saying that Israel was preparing for a possible ground operation in Lebanon. There is really a lot to unpack with all this, and we're going to bring in a local expert in politics to discuss it. We want to welcome Victor Ashe, former U.S. ambassador to Poland, not necessarily in the Middle East, but also the former mayor of Knoxville, among other roles that you have been in or have carried. Let's just jump right in. I want to say who's right or wrong, but does Israel have really a choice, being kind of surrounded by opposition, to keep fighting and not just lay back?
Well, we've been unwavering in our support of Israel, and obviously they're in a very difficult position where they're surrounded on numerous fronts by people who are sworn to the elimination of Israel as a free state.
Is that something that we probably don't understand, being Americans, to say, oh, these guys are
I think a large portion of our country understands, because there's a large Israeli and Jewish population that live in the United States, and they're extremely interested, as are others who are not necessarily Israeli, but who support the notion of a free and democratic country, which Israel is, and it's one of the few in the Middle East that is a democratic with a small d. But the conflict seems to be going on. If anything, it's much worse. It's been a conflict for centuries.
Right, and because of that, you've seen it swell and go down, grow, be aggressive, be more peaceful. Where is it now, and with what seems to be, or not what seems, what is actually happening compared to years in the past?
Clearly, the invasion into Israel and the attack, where many people were killed and others were captured, people who were kidnapped have been murdered, took it to a level it had never been at before, because Israel and Egypt, for example, had established diplomatic relations. Some of the other Arab countries are no longer constantly at odds with Israel, not necessarily in agreement either, but and Prime Minister Netanyahu clearly has a different point of view on these issues than either former President Trump or President Biden, and maybe Vice President Harris. Don't quite really know there, but the fact is, I don't see a quick solution. The United Nations could be the force if there was mutual agreement to enforce a ceasefire. Same could apply in Ukraine. And you know, here's the world not all that far apart in Ukraine and Russia, and then in Israel with Lebanon, Hezbollah, and others. And the world is in a more turbulent time right now than it's been in, really, I think, since World War II and the Korean conflict. Maybe the Vietnam War.
We certainly have.
The Vietnam War was limited primarily to Asia.
To that area. We certainly have two big fights
one in the Middle East and one in Eastern Europe.
And then you have the threats, say, like China, with some of those.
And what brings that even more into play is that Russia has access to nuclear weapons. We don't know if Iran has access. They certainly are working to manufacture nuclear weapons. I think the general thought is they're not there yet, but they certainly are trying to be there.
Our local politicians, or I should say our politicians from here that represent us in Washington, D.C., are they on the right side of these conflicts, or is it mixed?
Well, I don't know what you'd call the right side. I mean, our Senator Bill Hagerty was former ambassador to Japan, so he's certainly knowledgeable about it. And he serves on the Senate Foreign Affairs Committee, so he's certainly knowledgeable about these issues. They probably, in particular the outside, haven't been as outspoken in support of Ukraine as I would hope they'd be, because if Ukraine should fall to Russia, if people think that's the end of Putin's ambitions, they're sadly mistaken. And furthermore, if Putin signed an agreement, who thinks he's really will live up to it? I mean, he's not noted for telling the truth.
Right. We've seen that play out, say, like in World War II, where say, oh, yeah, we'll be peaceful.
Well, I mean, Putin is a modern-day Hitler, in my opinion.
Yeah, I'm sure you're not the only one that looks at him that way. I mean, he probably disguises it a little bit more, but he definitely is power hungry. He's trying to grab land.
I think that, you know, we need to do more than defend Ukraine. We need for Ukraine to win, and to win back the territory that was taken from Ukraine, Crimea, and that area. That area was taken almost 10 years ago now. And the United States at that point did not stand up and did not support Ukraine when that happened. We are today, although I wish we were doing more in that area than we have been. And I think when President Biden withdrew so suddenly from Afghanistan, unintentionally that sent the wrong signal to Putin that we could be pushed around.
And that's what I was going to get to. Has the Biden-Harris administration, did they handle that correctly? Could they maybe even prevented that from happening?
Furthermore, I don't know the degree to which Harris was or wasn't involved, but certainly the Biden administration, President Biden himself ordered it, so he's certainly culpable for what happened. And I think while President Trump, by the way, had already signed the agreement and for withdrawal,
but it also did have some outs in that agreement, right?
This withdrawal was in a precipitous manner. It was just like we're packing up and leaving. We left Afghans there who had been murdered by the Taliban, and who were strong supporters of ours, who were interpreters for our American soldiers, who were supporters. And
of course, we lost a local soldier.
Exactly, and it's very unfortunate, and I think that will go down as one of the low marks of President Biden's tenure.
What about in dealing with the Israeli conflict? Did the Biden administration do enough to say, hey, they could have maybe prevented it from
I think they're doing all they can.
What about, are they strong enough against Iran, who seems to be...
I mean, Netanyahu is a very independent-minded prime minister, and he and President Biden on numerous occasions simply don't agree on tactics. I think they agree in terms of Israel being a free and independent nation, but in terms of what is appropriate and the destruction of Gaza in that area, are where President Biden has certainly had a different approach, and members of Congress have had a different approach. The Senate Majority Leader Schumer has actually disagreed with Netanyahu, and Schumer is Jewish, obviously Prime Minister of Israel is, and so there have been differences within the community as to what is the best approach, recognizing that the independence and freedom of Israel is paramount.
Right. And again, someone who's standing over here looking at it versus someone who's in the middle of it with his people, you can see where they might have a different opinion on how we should be protecting ourselves.
No question about it. And the conflict is going to go on. The main effort, I think, is to contain it, keep it from spreading. Hopefully, the bloodshed and the death of innocent parties, civilians who are not involved as armed soldiers, will be halted.
Yeah, because it really is a terrible situation right now. And like you said, many people who don't deserve to be dead are dying in this conflict. Let's come in a little bit more locally while we have you. Some of your thoughts on the races going on. Marsha Blackburn, Gloria Johnson's just one of those races. It's got a lot of tension here in Tennessee.
Well, I think
but I did see you wrote something about where the DNC
I think it's unfortunate in the Marsha Blackburn, Gloria Johnson, but I'd also say in the Elaine Davis, Brian Goldberg, neither one are willing to debate the other. That is, the Republican candidate is declining to appear with the Democratic candidate. I'm one of those who believes that you should appear with your opponent at least once. I always did it when I was running for office, even opponents that maybe weren't considered that credible. But I think the public should have the opportunity and to see both of you there and discuss issues that have come up. And locally, Elaine Davis has just not made time available. Not only for your station, but for others. And the same is true with Gloria Johnson, has not been able to secure time with Marsha Blackburn. Obviously, Blackburn's substantially ahead, and she feels she doesn't need to. I think the Goldberg Davis race is a much more closely contested race, and is yet to be determined which way it'll go.
Right. That's part of strategy, though. I mean.
Well, it may be part of the strategy, and maybe it's good strategy. It's not good government.
Right. Well, move that up to the presidential race. They did have their one debate. Looks like they're not going to have another one. Is that the right move? Or depending on from which side of the aisle you're looking at.
You know, Trump's actually had 2 debates.
Well, that's true.
I think when the history books are written, particularly if he should lose, he made a huge mistake in agreeing to debate President Biden in June, because that debate revealed to all President Biden's weakness in terms of his advanced years and his inability to rise to the occasion, and resulted in the pressure to force him out. If the first debate had occurred in September, which it normally did, it would have been too late for Biden to get out, and Trump would have had an easy race against President Biden, in my view. I think the race with Harris can go either way, and she is a more formidable candidate for him. I think it's generally, despite President Trump saying he won the last debate, I think a lot of people feel Vice President Harris won it.
It's interesting how the category winning.
If he did win it, you'd think he'd want to do another one.
Right. Or some people say, well, yeah, she won, but yet it didn't change numbers greatly, and so you have people saying, well,
we live in a system of electoral. I mean, 42 of the 50 states are already determined. I mean, there are only 8 states, depending on how they go, that will really determine whether Harris or Trump wins. And that's why they're spending all their time in Michigan, Wisconsin, sometime in North Carolina, a little bit in Georgia, Minnesota.
Do you wish it was more? You wish 25 states had
Well, I think it's unfortunate, because in Tennessee, the Trump people don't come because they haven't won, in their view. The Harris people feel there's no way they could carry it, so why bother? And same thing with California and New York, except the other side will win that one. And I think we need to review the whole electoral college system. You have to remember, Trump, while he certainly was elected under our Constitution, he has never received a majority of the popular vote. Not even come close. I mean, one time he lost by 2 million, the other time he lost by 5 million. Those are substantial losses.
Right. Well, Victor, we appreciate you coming in and talking to us about basically everything. We covered things we said we were going to, and things that we didn't even think about covering. I want to appreciate your time. When we come back, we are going to have our panel of political pundits weigh in on some of the things that Victor had to say. Be right back. Welcome back to Tennessee This Week. Good to be with you. We just heard from Victor Ashe, former ambassador to Poland, also our former mayor here in Knoxville. And now we are bringing in our panel of pundits to talk about all this. Of course, we have Craig Griffith, Courtney Piper, and Michael Covington at the end of the desk there. Let's start with the end of what he said, not go in any order. Last thing that we were really talking about were debates. Gloria Johnson, Marsha Blackburn, part of that. Elaine Davis, Brian Goldberg, part of that as well. Craig, do you think that they always should be debates? And in these cases, these specific cases, will it matter?
Well, sitting at this desk here, I think, yes, we should have debates in every campaign, every race. Incumbents need to defend their positions, and challengers need to say why they could do it better. But if I was running either one of those campaigns, I would say, no, there's not a chance I'm going to debate.
Right.
There's nothing in it for Marsha Blackburn to have a statewide debate with Gloria Johnson. So I don't anticipate there will be one. And, I don't know whether they can corral Brian Goldberg and Elaine Davis into having one in that district race, which seems to be fairly competitive. And it's gotten a little nasty, too. So, it'll be interesting to see if that happens. But I would doubt it as the incumbent. I would say that she probably won't agree to a debate either.
Do you think, Courtney, with this much time left, that there would be a debate in either one of those races? And in lieu of that, if they can't have that, how does the person who needs to get more attention and needs to get out to those voters get that attention?
There's absolutely time to still have a debate. Victor Ashe is right. It is bad governance to deny the public, the voting public, the opportunity to debate your opponent. The incumbent absolutely does not deserve a free lunch. They need to be held accountable to what they have done. So when you see an incumbent deny the opportunity for a public debate, it means that they're embarrassed, ashamed, or feel like they cannot adequately defend their record because they don't want whatever they might say in the public sphere. Their opponent could use them against them, deliver infinite pieces of mail or other kinds of social content, and diminish their returns on Election Day.
Michael, how would you advise the Republicans, if they're both winning in this particular race, in these races, excuse me, and in this election? What would your advice be to them?
If you do not feel as though your opponent is credible and the only benefit that could come from a debate is for them to establish credibility for themselves, skip the debate with them. You don't need it. What you need is the voters that are going to put you back in office. Marsha Blackburn has that. She does not really need to spend any time with Gloria Johnson. And as far as Brian Goldberg and Elaine Davis, I'm not really sure why they're not having a debate. I think they probably should. And it's not too late, as Courtney said, but I don't think they will.
All right.
And especially with Brian Goldberg and Elaine Davis, some of those issues are very, very local to Knoxvillians. And so Elaine Davis was the one that wanted to do away with early voting. Elaine Davis put the city of Knoxville in this position to change how we do elections, and she does not even live in the city of Knoxville. I think she is embarrassed and ashamed and does not want to be held accountable to some of those decisions she's been making in Nashville.
Moving from that race, the presidential race, excuse me, former President Donald Trump, Vice President Kamala Harris. They've had the one debate. As Victor mentioned, President Trump's actually had two debates. We'll start with you, Michael. Should they have another debate? Would it be wise? Would it be smart for President Trump to do that? Or should he just stick to what he's saying right now and not do it?
Donald Trump survived a cage match with 3 opponents. He walked out of that cage match on his own 2 feet, with his shoulders back and his head held high. Kamala Harris did not lay a glove on him in that debate. Kamala Harris did not win that debate. Kamala Harris did not move the needle in her favor in that debate. That debate was a victory for Donald Trump, that he survived it and was able to talk about it enthusiastically after the fact. So there does not need to be another debate between Kamala Harris and Donald Trump. She'll have no more original things to say than she did before. He will be saying the same things that he's been saying for the last 2 years. There's no real point in it.
I'm curious your take on that, Courtney, and then we'll get to you, Craig.
Heck yeah, there needs to be another debate. You know, again, back to the same points that we are saying. Donald Trump was a sitting president. Kamala Harris is part of the current administration. So they both deserve the opportunity to talk about their records and their vision for the future should they become president. There should absolutely be another debate.
Yeah, part of this, in my recollection, and maybe I'm wrong about this, it seemed like President Trump was calling for a debate, and Kamala was not answering. Kamala was not answering that at first. Then they said, "Okay, let's do it," because it called for 3.
That's not how I recall.
We had 3 of them, and President Biden did 1, and then he said there's 2 more.
After the first one, Kamala Harris said, "Let's do it again." She wanted to do it again, and President Trump was.
Okay, but I'm saying I thought they were going to have one like CBS, ABC, then you got the vice presidents, and then one on Fox, but. Did she miss an opportunity to say yes sooner?
The loser in a boxing match always wants a rematch. And the loser in this debate wanted a rematch.
That is not true. The winner in a sports competition always wants the rematch to defend their record
Statistically
and stay
speaking,
on top.
everyone seems to think that Harris, except for very Donald Trump supporters, won that debate in terms of presentation and policies. So I don't think you'll ever see Donald Trump debate again. You know, it's, I think he realizes that he had many shortcomings in that, even though he followed his usual procedure of turning a negative into something he thought was positive. So I don't think there'll be any more debates on that. And now it's just up to each party to get out the vote. That's where we are now in this election. We're at the point where you have to mobilize your base to get out and vote. And whoever does that. And this race is so tight, according to the polls, and I don't believe in a lot of polls, but you know, the national polls mean nothing. Yeah. It's only the polls in the swing states.
It nationally just basically says, hey, it's 50-50. It's, again, those 8 states, 7, 8 states.
The swing state polling, and of course, it's least accurate of it all. So we'll just have to see on election night tonight, which I think will be a very long night. And we'll go into the next day and probably the next day after that. So, you know, debates, it would be nice, civically speaking. And it'd be nice if the Commission on Debates did the debates instead of the TV networks.
Right.
And so, you know, so that we don't have the illusion of a candidate thinking that he's debating 3 people and in his own mind. So we'll see if that happens in the next presidential cycle.
So the polling is not going to get your stamp of approval, at least right now.
Well,
We're going to take a break. Much more Tennessee This Week when we come back. Welcome back to Tennessee This Week. UT Chancellor Donnie Plowman is staying at the helm of the University of Tennessee for at least the next 5 years. The chancellor, who has served in the position since 2019, making the announcement during her flagship address, that was Thursday afternoon, reflecting on the direction that she has been taking the university.
I am proud of us for the progress we've seen in the last 5 years. And it is an honor to stand in front of you today and recount the gains that we've made together. But the real testament to the work we've done is not really the records we've set or that we're breaking. It is and will always be the people whose lives we are improving.
So, discussing the University of Tennessee, the system here locally, the Knoxville, I'm just curious, and since we've started with Craig and with Michael, we'll start with you, Courtney, especially since you were a student there. And,
yes.
And performed there. How great is the leadership that we have that is in charge of the University of Tennessee, Knoxville?
It is tremendous. I am a huge Don D. Plowman fan from the moment I heard her speak when she first arrived in the state of Tennessee. What she has done with the University of Tennessee, Knoxville, is nothing short of extraordinary. Under her leadership, retention rates have improved for freshmen, so going from first semester to second semester and first year to second year. She has found infinite ways that we can capture audiences and students that we have not been capturing to help them identify what sort of degrees and majors and interests there might be to meet a new economy, one that's bolstered by innovation and not necessarily what you would think of as your grandfather's manufacturing. So, you know, and her efforts to increase an emphasis on entrepreneurship as a research institution with the University of Tennessee and developing partnerships to that end, I am really excited for the next 5 years because her first tenure at the University of Tennessee has brought so much growth, development, and excitement that, you know, the sky's the limit under her leadership.
A lot of people, of course, when they think of the schools, they immediately gravitate to the sports, and Tennessee's been great at everything lately. Are they really missing the more important picture, maybe, of how the students we're sending out to the world?
Oh, there's something more important in the football team?
There is.
Obviously, you're from around here.
No, you know what I mean. On Saturdays, there is nothing more important, but I mean, in the overall sense.
Well, it is. They are student athletes, and it is a university. And I'll echo what Courtney said about the tremendous improvements in you know, the operation of the university. It seemed that through a succession of poor choices for chancellor and poor choices for president, you know, the focus went off the students. You know, and now the chancellor is now laser focused on what do you need to be successful at the University of Tennessee? What can we do to help you to be successful? What can we do to make you an engaged citizen that will take your degree from here and improve conditions in the state of Tennessee? So that, to me, is a totally change in outlook from before. And now, and I have to say that she and, of course, President Randy Boyd have found a way to coincide with the state legislature. They have found a way to make peace with the people in Nashville so that, you know, they can concentrate on their mission without interference from legislation that comes from Nashville. So we'll, you know, I think we're doing excellent. I mean, we're retaining students, and the university is on a good course now.
Right, and Michael, I wanted to get into that. How do you see the future playing out for the University of Tennessee, Knoxville, with its leadership in place now for the next 5 years or so?
I think the University of Tennessee is in great shape. I echo Courtney's sentiments that she's a fantastic leader. When I met her, and we're friends on social media, and I don't even know how it happened. She is that endearing. She is a whole world apart from the disaster of the previous chancellor of the University of Tennessee. She just was not up to the task. But when Don D. Plowman took on the NCAA, that to me said she's the real deal. She's a vested member of the Rocky Top community. So,
and we're going to end with that comment. One thing I'd say, they still need to deal with parking. But hey, that's the whole.
It's a university, and it's always supposed to be parking.
Thanks for watching. We'll see you next week on Tennessee This Week.
The views of guests on Tennessee This Week are their own and do not represent the views of WATE 6 on your side or Nexstar Broadcasting.